I'm going to look at the detailed structure of the heart, so work with me. Once again, we'll start from the right side. That is the superior vena cava. Inferior vena cava meets, and the two empty into the right atrium. From the right atrium, we have the tricuspid valve, which now takes us to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, we have the right semilunar valve, and from there the blood goes all the way up through the pulmonary artery into the heart. Now I'm going to highlight this in blue to represent deoxygenated blood. Okay, now to the right side. We start from the septum, the thicker wall of the left ventricle, semilunar valves again, bicuspid valve this time, and then this leads to the aorta. That is the left atrium. Okay, this time I'm going to highlight it red to signify oxygenated blood. Okay, next is to show the direction of blood flow, which would be in green. We have from the superior vena cava, from the vena cava superior and interior and inferior rather, down into the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, and then up through the semilunar valves through the pulmonary artery. And on the right side as well, the left side rather, we can be coming from the pulmonary vein into the right atrium, down to the bicuspid valve, up through the semilunar valve, and then through the aorta. So let's do some quick labeling of the parts. Yeah. So inferior vena cava, superior see, right atrium, left, sorry, right ventricle, left ventricle. We have the left atrium. This will be the aorta. Then pulmonary artery. Right. So how do we navigate our way through this? First things first. To know an easy way of knowing the left and the right part of the heart is very simple. If someone was standing right in front of you, which part would be their left side, which part would be their right side? Their left side will be on your right, and their right side will be on your left. So we can easily say that this side is the left, that is the right. You can't get that confused, okay? It's not your heart, it's the heart of someone in front of you. Next is the arteries and the atrium and the ventricles. Very simply, the top part is the atrium, lower part ventricle. So this will simply be right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. How does the blood come in? From the vena cava, which is just a big vein, superior from the upper part of the body, inferior from the lower part of the body, into the right atrium, down through these valves. Now, what does a valve do? It prevents backflow. So you can think of these valves closing up like that to prevent backflow. Once again on this side, this will prevent backflow. And the way it does that is with the use of the chordae tendineae, which are simply the heartstrings or tendinous cords, which will stretch out and prevent the blood from going back in the wrong direction. So I hope we are okay with the structure of the heart and also the direction of blood flow. The next thing I'm going to do is to give you another slide, this time where we now look at the cardiac cycle proper. So take note of the labels we've done here. So the cardiac cycle. Right. The cardiac cycle is simply a series of events in the contraction of the heart. And we can think of three simple events, okay? Let's talk of the use of the two words, diastole and systole. Diastole simply meaning relaxed, and systole meaning contracted. Now, so there are three main events in the contraction of the heart or the cardiac cycle. The first being the fact that the heart must be in a relaxed state in order to allow blood to flow in. So we'll refer to that as the diastole stage, where it's relaxed and blood simply flows in. The second would be when blood is being pumped from the atrium into the ventricle, and that we'll refer to as the atrial systole. The atria will simply contract and allow blood or force blood into the ventricles. This drawing not very good, so let's try that again. The next thing would be, so we've talked about two things so far. One, atrial, the diastole, which is when all parts of the heart are relaxed to allow the flow of blood to come in. The second one, we said, was atrial systole, when the atria contract left and right to force blood into the ventricles. The next thing would be the ventricles, now full with blood, need to now contract to force the blood out of the heart into the aorta and the pulmonary vein. And those are the three events. So, one, blood flows in from there and there, and this is happening simultaneously, where left and right are simply two separate parts. And the blood is now filling up here and here. In this stage, we say the heart is in diastole, relaxed. Now, as this fills up, the blood now goes down here and goes down here. But you don't have all the blood in there yet. So, the atria must now contract. And when the atria contract, so think about all these walls narrowing inwards like that. Okay? Atria contracts. As the atria contracts, the blood is now forced downwards into the ventricles now. So now the ventricles are completely filled up with blood, and this time they need to be prevented from going all the way back into the atria. So the ventricles are now filled with blood, and we go on to the next stage, which is atrial systole. The blood is now in here, and the ventricles would contract. But before then, the bicuspid and tricuspid valves, or the atrioventricular valves, would shut. Now, why do they shut? They shut because, due to the buildup of pressure in the ventricles, the tendinous cords stretch out and hold them or prevent them from moving back into the atria. And that's why these cords are so important. Do you see that? So, the ventricle is now filled with blood, and so the next stage comes in where now the ventricle now contracts, and that we'll call ventricular systole. Now the ventricles contract in such a way that it starts from downwards from the bottom, and then it stretches upwards. Okay, so goes upwards like that, and then by doing so, the blood is now forced out through the semilunar valves, up this way, and through the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. This is what we call ventricular systole. Okay? So just don't forget these three steps. Diastole, atrial systole, ventricular systole. Think of the valves involved. Diastole, completely relaxed. Atrial systole, the atrioventricular valves open. Blood is forced into the ventricles. When the ventricles are filled up, the atrioventricular valves shut. End of atrial systole. Third, ventricular systole. The ventricle now contracts inwards and upwards, forcing the blood through the semilunar valves into the aorta and the pulmonary artery, respectively. Okay. The last thing I need to mention is simply how is this. So, if you're asked to describe the cardiac cycle, that is exactly what we've done. We've described the cardiac cycle. But if you're asked to explain how the cardiac cycle is controlled, then we have to look at the next stage, which is simply how the role of the SAN and the AVN enable this to happen. Right, so here we go. I'm going to draw the third heart. You're going to be tired of this, but just to get you so used to it that you can literally guess what I'm referring to. I'm going to do this very quickly, and it's going to be rough as well. Take note of the fact that I always make the wall of the left side of the heart much thicker than the right side. That question keeps popping up every time, and it's simply because of the fact that the left side of the heart must pump blood around the whole body. So now we are looking at the control of the cardiac cycle, and for that we refer to two specific nodes. The first node is the sinoatrial node, which sits in the wall of the right atrium. The second is the atrioventricular node. So this is the SAN, sinoatrial node, and then we have the AVN, atrioventricular node. Now, think about the fact that every cell in the heart is actually myogenic, which means that it can actually contract on its own volition. It doesn't need any control for that to happen. But if every cell in the heart was contracting independently, you would have lots of problems. So it must be coordinated, and that coordination comes from the role of the SAN. The SAN sends a signal that goes right round all parts of the atrium, and this ensures that atrial systole happens. Now the question is, why does this signal not travel downwards? Simply because you have insulation tissue in the green or non-conductive tissue, which prevents the impulse, the electrical signal, from going all the way down to the ventricles. So it sort of just bounces off this layer. Take note of that. Non-conductive tissue. Therefore, all the signals then assemble at the AVN. From the AVN, the signal then travels down through special tissues we call the bundle of His. And then from there, it spreads through the walls of the ventricle. And this is what results in the ventricular systole. With this design, as you can see, atrial systole is always going to be, it's always going to happen before ventricular systole can happen. The two cannot happen at the same time. The final thing is to now look at the electrocardiogram. The electrocardiogram is simply a pattern that shows the electrical signals in a single heartbeat. These are the three things you need to recognize. One, the P wave, the QRS complex, and the T wave. The P wave simply, now go back to the cardiac cycle. What's the first stage of the cardiac cycle? Atrial systole. The QRS complex is the second stage. What does that refer to? This is the ventricular systole. The third one, the T wave, refers to the diastole. Just remember that. So P is for atrial systole, QRS, ventricular systole, and then the T wave, diastole, which is the relaxation of the heart. So that ends our session on the structure of the heart and the cardiac cycle. I hope you have learned something from this and you can actually put some meaning into what you read from your textbooks. Thank you.